Chair, I don't know if we're on the record, but I have to go to a public hearing for one of my clients in an hour, and I'd like an opportunity to speak out of order. And if you would read the name of the next person and see if they'd be okay with that, that would be great.
Let me get back out of recess, and we'll go down the order. And then if that person wishes to. Okay.
Motion to go back into second.
Motion and second have been made. Mr. Martinez, would you please call that?
Commissioner Romero?
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yes.
Commissioner Bambro?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yes.
Chairman Hicks?
Yes. Next person up is L. Burnett.
And I say she can speak.
She'll take your turn and you'll take hers?
No, no, I'm just gonna, I just think it's very important.
Will you raise your right hand? Do you swear and affirm under oath and honesty of law or perjury that the testimony about the witness to affirm?
Yes, it is.
Please state your name.
My name is Susan Baker. I'm a local government lawyer and also an attorney in local land use. I have been for 25 years. My interpretation of your land use code amendment is that it clearly allows 5G in the door. I'll read the language that you use. Excluded is upgrading, replacement, addition, or modification of antennas and equipment panels with an existing wireless telecommunications facility for technological or safety reasons. As someone's already pointed out, the key word is technological. That allows carte blanche location, co-location of 5G antenna on your existing towers without any regulation, without a permit. The key here, and this is the slippery slope, is that once you let 5G in the door, you will have no legal remedy to regulate 5G. The FCC is a federal bureaucracy. It has rulemaking authority, simply that. Its authority is less than that of Congress, and certainly less than that of the U.S. Constitution and the New Mexico Constitution. Both constitutions preserve the local government zoning authority. They're known as police powers, and it gives you the authority to protect local people, their health, their safety, and their welfare. I propose to you that the FCC cannot take away this authority. They have rulemaking power. They're a federal bureaucracy. It would be like if the Department of Energy next year decided that you had to allow nuclear power plants out on the mesa, that your local zoning authority was usurped, your 10th Amendment constitutional right. So I ask you not to give up this constitutional right so easily. I also ask you to consider the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is an act of Congress. It applies to local governments. And it says you have to make reasonable accommodations for disabled people. Just like outside, we have wheelchair access because of that law. You have to comply with that law. If you allow the location of 5G towers in your public right-of-way, which you hold in trust for the public, and an antenna ends up next to a school where we have a child with leukemia, and that child dies, you haven't reasonably accommodated, and you're in violation of the ADA. Please don't be so shy about asserting your power under the U.S. and New Mexico constitutions. Mr. Audio is correct that the New Mexico legislature, and I'll note, under the previous governor, things have certainly changed in New Mexico, we all know that, so we don't really know what's coming in this area. They have gone along with the FCC and adopted state legislation that may limit your power to regulate your local right-of-way. However, if you look at the recent Supreme Court case out of California, the California Supreme Court case states that the 10th Amendment power is greater than even the California legislature's limitation on local government rule over zoning, over your right-of-way, because of the FCC rule. FCC rule. It doesn't even have the force and effect of law. I ask you to protect your local people, to assert your zoning powers in favor of the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Taos County. Thank you.
Section of our land use rights there, can you give me the number?
Well, I was citing the proposed change, and it clearly allows an exclusion for any new antenna that co-locates on an existing tower. That's what the language says to me. Yeah, thank you.
Do you swear to affirm under oath and penalty of public perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth? Please state your name.
My name is Elle Burnett, Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for the time. I want to address, first of all, my feeling is no more 5G, no more 6G, no more towers, period. Make Kit Carson go follow through with the fiber optics plan and stop leading people down the road and then sticking in smart boxes in their houses on their own little clandestine movement that's causing nosebleeds and heart palpitations and all kinds of heart issues. So having said that, if you must make a decision, then a special use permit has to be what needs to be in play. All of these issues are directly relating your people, your public. We have a right to defend our health, defend our children, defend our animals, to keep the birds' hearts from exploding in the sky while they're trying to fly around because the microwave frequencies are too hot. Those birds that fell out of the sky in the south several years ago that just hit the ground, their hearts were exploding in midair while they were flying because the microwave frequencies were too hot. Now, I want to take us down the rabbit hole just a little further. This is not about the land use, but this is important for everybody to know. Get your pens ready. I want to give you some sites on YouTube to go check out. The chemtrails that they are dropping on us, the aerosols, are not just chemicals that are deleterious, but they are dropping fibers on us. These fibers are so fine, they're very difficult to detect. You can go online to a site called Herbs Plus Beadworks. The man is a Canadian. He was very ill. I wear a black wool hat. By the end of the day, my hat's covered with fibers. These fibers get in our systems. We're ingesting them. We're breathing them in. They lodge in your lungs. You have shortness of breath. They're also in the lower GI tract. What happens is at night, people are waking up from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. They are waking up. How many? Anybody in here doing it? It's happening to me. I know there's a lot of people waking up. We are being activated by the cell towers because the fibers that are in us are creating networks. We are activated by the cell towers that are activating the fibers in us. You lay there for 2-3 hours, you can't go back to sleep. You don't understand why. We are literally being slowly cooked from the inside out. These microwave towers, I say Taos stays fry-free. We don't have to go with cell towers. Let's go with the fiber optics. Let's stay on the ground with our communications. Let's set a standard for the world. Let the national news see us. Let the international news see us and say, wow, they did it. We can do it too. We don't want the towers here. The children are suffering. The animals are suffering. And I thank you for listening to me and letting me rant a little bit. But I want to give, if I may, bye-bye blue skies, Susan Mayer, Herbs Plus Beadworks. Morgellons is what they're calling the fibers. Research it, people, so that when we come back to have a moratorium on 5G, 6G, 10G towers, we've got knowledge and we can stop this diabolical scourge from coming upon us.
Thank you. Real quick before I call next person, I hear a lot about what fiber's going to do and Kit Carson should be doing. They do have a meeting once a month. Please go visit them. I mean, their room is empty half the time. Go visit them. Let them know what you feel and how you guys want to move forward. I mean, we're here to help advocate things that you guys want to see be done.
All right.
Strength in numbers. Bonnie Shields.
Do you swear to affirm under oath and penalty of law for perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
Hello, I appreciate your time. I know you're probably getting hungry. I am too, having today. Using my phone for this because, well, you know, where we live in. I've been in Taos for going on 7 years. Taos is a hardy, honest, and culturally rich town, a place existing within nature, a place where you can escape the city. The bubble of Taos, known for going against the grain, staying strong, staying authentic, not allowing larger, greedier companies to come in. Now, heard here today, wording can be elaborate, co-location of wireless antennas, the idea that we need more service in Taos, so we modify the existing towers, because we also want Taos to look pretty, to preserve the aesthetics of historical Taos. Understandable. So the idea is we cluster signal extenders and crowd the airspace versus crowding our town with the eradication of new towers. Seems like a great alternative, but it's worded to sound great. But it is far from great in actuality. In regards to this amendment that was presented to you, first the instruments to distribute these signals must be in place in order to be turned on and utilized. We don't want these companies to have the option to turn on. What if you could visually see frequency? If you could see with your naked eyes these signals and their power, how would you feel? Imagine that sound, what sounds like a good day at the beach, the waves gently cresting and rolling into shore. Imagine a bad day, a multitude of waves, cresting in chaos, turbulent and steadfast, throwing water in every direction. These antennas function on wavelengths. It's called a wavelength, and the wordage can be interpreted as so. Wavelength, definition. The distance between successive crests of a wave, especially points in a sound wave or electromagnetic waves. More antennas cluster upon towers, creating a turbulent storm of high radiating frequencies, constantly bouncing around from device to tower, thrashing into everything in its wake. These are signals that the general public will not be able to shield themselves from. The age of information is upon us, and we have a choice to educate. To educate ourselves and decide carefully on how we use this technology. To not be fooled by clever wording that leaves gray areas, yet undefined. We have a choice to not misuse technology. How many children do we see holding phones now? Your kids, your parents, your closest friends, you, me right now. Do we ignore research and well-being of our community and well-being of our loved ones, and particularly our loved one, Mother Earth? If European countries are banning the expansion of this technology near schools, where the brains of children are developing, should we not think twice? We don't fully know what we are risking allowing this technology in, or in this case, just the simple introduction of more antennas. It is pressure from mainstream corporations with money interests going to sway the hearts of the hardy Taos folks. Is cell companies having more antennas on top of towers for faster download speeds a priority for Taos County's people? What about the four-legged, the winged ones, the gilled ones, the creepy crawly ones? Will they also receive a better signal? Do people actually want this high-frequency expansion and technology, or does corporation with financial interest want these towers to function this way? We have lived a fast-paced life. Phones are an asset in many ways, but they do not need to be turned into even more effective tiny weapons, pinging the static airwaves. Personally, 3G and 4G service works enough for me and is probably hurting me enough as it is. Taos reminds me to think in a way that is in resonance with the earth, to turn off every once in a while and to ground down and to listen. Our lasting native culture here values honoring a 7-generational outlook. There's 7 generations of people, not 7 generations of technology. I ask that you consider all aspects of this, to consider all living beings. Consider your community and consider yourselves.
Yes.
Don't give up our 7 generations for the hope of faster 5-generation service or the expansion of more antennas on towers. Think real grandfathers, not grandfathers to be, and grandfathers to be, not grandfathered in towers. Help us to better regulate the gray area of this amendment and the permits coming from it. Help us to make sure to do proper research, including benefits and conduction.
That's my additional 30 seconds,
Okay. Thanks. I have hopes and prayers for a good decision that you guys will make. Appreciate your time.
Is Crystal, I can't see her last name. You can say it for me, that way I learn.
Do you swear and affirm to open and to help the country that the about to give a protest?
I do, thank you. Crystal Craig. Thank you for hearing us. I'm a teacher and a citizen in Taos County, and I'm here on behalf of the youth and future generations. I would like you to vote no on this amendment today, because I believe that it's too dangerous to put the approval process of new antennas into the hands of only one person without oversight. I think that the proposed checklist that Mr. Behill shared with us that was suggested by the FCC is too basic, and it doesn't ask enough detailed questions about what these antennas will be used for. It doesn't ask specifically if it will be 5G technology. It doesn't ask what the output of the antennas will be. It's only asking about size. And as we see with technology, as every year they're coming out with smaller and smaller technology with more and more power. So I think it's important that if you're going to have a checklist, if you're going with your permitting process, that it should have more detailed questions about what the actual effects of that antenna will be on the population. Also, as Commissioner Blankenhorn asked to Mr. Behill, he asked if it was possible that 5G technology could be introduced through the language of this amendment, and Mr. Behill said yes. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So that was kind of the thing here today that struck me the most, that is actually a possibility with the language of this amendment. And if nothing else, I think that is enough to warrant voting no or changing significantly the language so that it will specifically state that 5G will not be able to be introduced through the changes of this amendment with only one person overseeing that ability.
We're gonna get all your words in, so now you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think the only way that I personally would feel comfortable with the changes in the amendment as they are now is if there was language or a clause that would put a memorandum on 5G technology, at least within thank you. on 5G technology within this amendment. Otherwise, I think that that more conversation needs to be had and more specifics put into this to make sure that we're not getting 5G without actually having public commentary on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalia, over there.
Raise your hand. Do you swear and affirm under oath and penalty of law for certain that the testimony about you is true and the truth?
Yes, I do. My name is Madalena Oliveria. So we were reminded right before we gave our public comments that this wasn't about 5G. And as we just heard, it does have a little bit to do with 5G. We were told to keep it to the point. And so I have a quote here from Edward Behill from March 19th, 2019, as he was addressing the commission, where he said the reason why we would be bringing this amendment is because, and I quote, "We at the planning committee have been experiencing an influx of cell tower carriers addressing our requirements, wanting to improve existing telecommunication infrastructure. The reason they are wanting to improve is the push to 5Gen. He repeated that 5Gen, which stands for 5G, 5th generation, at least 4 times. You can look at the recordings online. We've got the videos up. It's very clear, and that's what we're talking about here. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Daniel C. Lynette Leary. Rhonda Layden. Lauren Lucierta.
Nice try.
Yeah, I'll get better sometime.
It's okay, I don't know any Spanish. So.
Do you swear and affirm under oath and penalty of law for perjury that the testimony about you is true and the truth?
I do.
Please state your name.
Elizabeth Lucretia, and I am, been a nurse since the 60s, retired now because that's a long time ago, and a doula, a childbirth educator, a massage therapist, an energy worker, Reiki master, and yoga teacher. So my whole life since the 60s has been devoted to health and well-being of humanity. Mother of 4, grandmother of 7 so far. I'm here to submit something. Well, first of all, I'm part of the Taos Alliance for Public Health and Safety, and I volunteer to go around to doctors, chiropractors, dentists, different healthcare midwives, with a big packet of stuff for their information, because what I'm finding out is how uninformed the public and even the medical profession is about the effects of 5G and all technology that's currently available, as you've heard today. So I'm here to submit an international appeal to stop 5G on the Earth and in space. There are 63,379 signatories from at least 168 countries as of March 29, 2019, to the UN, WHO, the EU, the Council of Europe, and governments of all nations. We, the undersigned scientists, doctors, environmental organizations, and citizens from X countries, urgently call a halt to the deployment of 5G wireless network, including 5G from space satellites. 5G will massively increase exposure to radio frequencies, radiations, on top of 2G, 3G, 4G networks for telecommunications already in place. Radio frequency radiations has been proven harmful to humans and the environment. The deployment of 5G constitutes an experiment on humanity and the environment that is defined as a crime under international law. And it's an executive summary, and it's 12 pages long, and I submit this. I vote no. We need to really take a look at the wording of what is going to be voted on today before we implement anything further. Thank you.
Victoria, Gunn. Kimberly Weber. Tom Eddington.
I think he left.
Jenny Parks.
She had to go.
Seth Brown. And then our last one is Jolene. Eustace.
You raise your right hand. Do you swear to affirm under oath and penalty of law for the perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and factual?
I did a lot of research on the 5G thing.
Speak up.
A friend of mine and I shot out all the street lights in Taos up till 1974. Was coming.
Speak up.
Anyway.
Can you speak up, sir?
Okay, so the street lights all along the Paseo, which according to the county manager is under the jurisdiction of the highway department, appear to have 5G antennas on top of the street light. There's a flat street lights and they have a little square box on the top. And if you go on the internet, people in England, all over the world, are where they are installing 5G secretly without telling people. They're complaining of bleeding noses and all these symptoms from the streetlights as soon as the streetlights went in. So we need to investigate, call the district engineer in Santa Fe. His name is Paul Brusher, 505-795-0533, and ask him if the highway department has already installed 5G in Taos, and why are these little antennas on top of the street lights? emergency, turn off your Wi-Fi in your house and install Ethernet cable. Every single home that has Wi-Fi is broadcasting strong pulses of microwaves 24/7, and it's really causing a lot of problems. So that's the biggest thing we can do right now. And thank you to the county for listening to us and considering what the knowledge of the people here is. You know, it's amazing. My family moved to Taos in the mid-40s to get away from the insanity back east. And it was simple and beautiful here until the early 70s when stuff started pouring in here, and it's just been constant. One developer after another, airport, all this stuff is just, you know, ever since I got out of high school, I joined 10 different organizations to try to stop development here, and we succeeded until the Val Verde Commons and the airport. And then it's just, you know, so thank you for listening to us about 5G.
My name is Jillian Eustace. I want to say good afternoon from the Dory Inn all the way to the Dory Out. I'm grateful to be here and to listen and learn more about 5G network. I am Jillian Eustace. I'm half Coach Pueblo on my mom's side. I come from the Sage clan. I am half Zuni Pueblo on my dad's side, and I come from the Parrot clan. I am here, and I noticed that I probably am the only Native person in this room since this morning. So I felt I had to get up, stand up, and represent my Native nation. I work at Naukri at First Nations Community Health Source. I am the supervisor for the traditional healing program. And I am very concerned about this 5G network. I was raised through our claim traditional way because my late dad, Zuni Pueblo, was a medicine man. And he told me, as I was growing up, to be careful about what I say, how I speak, because there's a lot of racism, annihilation, degradation against us Native people. But here I am in 2019, and I feel it's very important to speak out. I know that there are a lot of natives out on the reservation who don't have an idea about 5G network. And so I'm doing my best to learn as much as I can so I can share it with my native peoples. And I just want to say thank you for listening to us about this situation, this great problem, this great fear, this great oncoming sickness. And I hope that 5G network is not going to be a part of our history. Also, I just want to say Nipakese. Nipakese means on revelations. I always say this through the Lakota language. We acknowledge everything that is alive upon Mother Earth. We acknowledge the land, the water, the fire, the heavens, the four-legged, the winged ones, the ones that live underground. And all to us as Native nations, life is sacred. You are sacred. We all are sacred, our spirits, and we want to live. So I'm totally against 5G network for my grandchildren and for all of Mother Earth, regardless of skin color or race. Nipakese.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I reclaim just like a minute of my time?
Reclaim. Sure, I mean, we'll be eating lunch anyway till 2 maybe.
One more, sorry. Do you swear to affirm under oath and penalty of law to the that the
founder of the Taos Alliance for Public Health and Safety. And when we started this thing, I just thought this was so funny, and I thought maybe we could just have a little debate. Somebody came up to our table to sign our petition. And, we started telling him all about 5G and blah, 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 what we're here for. And he said, hey, people in Taos are more afraid of gluten than they are 5G radio. However, I think we've proved otherwise today. So, thank you very much.
This concludes our public comment period. It is 12:54. In closing, I just want to make sure that everyone in here knows that per our departments, whether it's the assessor's office, treasurer's office, and zoning departments, every department has a responsibility is to assess, evaluate, and review ordinances, practices, everything. Now, what could have been done today was not this been brought to this commission. And we would not be talking about this today, other than in our little meeting groups and everything else. And 5G, or if anything else, could have come forth without at least somebody reviewing this. And I give kudos to Mr. Vigil and his department for bringing this up, knowing that it was going to stir a whole lot of conversation. So I want to make sure that the conversation, and I want the Plan Zoning Department to know that we would encourage them to continue to look at those ordinances, continue to review, continue to see if they practice in the applications that are going to be coming forth, and if we need to change those, we'll do so in a productive, health, welfare, and social way that makes it beneficial for the county. This is not something that Mr. Vigil is doing personally to make 5G better. It's not to open the doors. It is basically he's seeing a flaw in conflicting language that would help us get better opportunity to have this conversation. So I want to make that very clear to all of you that without his initiative to try to review this thing, we would have let this pass us by 2-3 years from now. What the hell happened? So please, continue to follow I just, it's just something that we need to always continue to support our departments, our department heads, our staff here at the county. Nobody's perfect. We appreciate it, and we got a good 2.5 hours or 3 hours of what's coming forth. Not always do people most pay attention, but because of somebody's initiative to make sure, Mr. Vigil's probably got 5 years left here. It's going to be terrible to lose a valued asset of Mr. Vigil, because he took initiatives on not only this issue, but many other issues in the past that have developed and made this land use regulation become a better tool for us to use in the whole environment. So at this point, I will be asking, call for a vote for the commission to move forward with the proposed ordinance 2019-4.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go to executive session to discuss this. We have a legal right to do so.
I will credit this to Mr. Ratio.
Commissioner, Vice Chair and Commissioners, we can only go into executive session on land use matters when it arises out of a quasi-judicial process. And it's on a case specific. That's when we can adjudicate in private. When we're looking at an amendment to an ordinance, for better or for worse, we get to do it with all of you.
There's open for question for
Is there no chance to reword it at this point to improve it before it's voted upon?
I'm going to go ahead and let Mr. Commissioner Fambro move forward with his questions.
Sorry, I have a bunch of questions. I'll take all the 3 minutes that everybody did. I'll lose some what they overtook. This isn't in any order. This is just as you spoke, it was something that came to me. I want to start out by saying I'm as pro-fiber as the next guy. I think that we should support that program. I love having it at my house. It's helped my son get to the next level. I don't know anything about 5G. I really don't. I've been trying to find out. My son is going into school for environmental sciences, and I've heard what he has to say about it and everything, and it's not as bad as what all of you people are saying today. So I've got a lot of research to do. I first got to ask: are all the lawsuits of the local governments really out there? Are they? Should we wait to see if those are settled before we go forward or anything?
Yes.
I mean, is Dallas really suing? Or is it community groups? Is it local government? I'm asking, I'm sorry, we heard you guys now.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Pembroke, there have been challenges and a couple different speakers. And first I want to thank all of the high level of discussion from all the speakers and the professionals that have brought their professional opinions. It was very fruitful, I thought. The issue is, yes, there are challenges, and what the issue on 5G challenge is, it's hard to separate all of it. So there's an overarching issue: is 5G a healthy technology that doesn't harm people or other animals or plants? So there's that issue. What is the focus of most of the challenges is about the authority of the federal government to tell us how to regulate something, and saying we can't regulate our own land use regulations. They're severely limiting what we can do with land use regulations. So, and I agree with you, I'm not a scientist. I think it's worth looking at all of the literature that we can obtain when we go down the road to look at how we can regulate 5G. The problem is, when I looked at the state statute that I mentioned earlier, it severely limits us, and we should look at amending that. So please contact your local legislators to take a look at how we can increase our powers to regulate. The other thing is we need to talk to Washington, because that's where the problem lies. And I'm sorry I started to ramble, Commissioner, but I guess it's the spirit of the moment.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So I'm trying to make a quick order of this. You know what I really liked, Mr. Vito, was the suggestion that if this is passed, that you come up with, maybe with some help from some people, a more detailed list of things that you would ask instead of something that was generated by the SEC. I really like that suggestion, so I'd like for you to consider that if this is something that you end up doing. It's troubling for a commissioner to make decisions when you go out during the breaks and you hear people saying they're going to do what they want anyway, their mind's already made up. I don't come in here with my mind made up on anything. As I just told you guys, I don't know anything about 5G. It's not there yet. So I don't know, and I don't know how we base what it's going to do if it's not there yet. So I'm having a hard time kind of picturing that. So, but when you hear the comments of people saying that you've already made up their minds and you're wasting your time, you're not wasting your time at all about being Mr. Vito, are there any, it was at least three times I have on my tally sheet here that we're committing an illegal act by passing these changes today. Are you suggesting that this commission committing an illegal act? Sorry, it was very pointed out at least three times.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Pembroke, it is my belief, and obviously it is not a legal interpretation, it is my belief that we are not creating an illegal act.
Okay, thank you. If we change this and it's subject to every tower issue is a special use permit, it's adding more to Commissioner O'Donnell's concerns of the time spent by staff and everything. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Pembroke, if I'm understanding your question, if we take a strict interpretation to say these amendments will all require a special use permit, or the addition of additional antennas on towers will all require a special use permit, it would certainly create a it would appear, obviously, I don't know how many applications we would receive, but it would appear that it would create a little, somewhat of a workload in the planning department.
Okay. Just a couple more. Are we really losing power, getting power away, reducing our enforcement powers of the land use regs with the changes of this ordinance?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Commissioner Fambro, my personal opinion, again, it's not an attorney, a legal interpretation, is to say no. Possibly for more clarification that I would respectfully yield to Mr. Ogden.
Commissioner Fambro, Commissioners, the problem that is the driver of this change, there was an internal inconsistency. So regardless of federal law, that internal inconsistency we can fix. The problem that's driving this is federal law as interpreted by the FCC. A couple speakers said FCC doesn't create law. That's true, it's Congress. But Congress passed a law and FCC is interpreting it to say that we cannot deny a modification to a tower that's smaller than 10% of the tower's size or capacity. And so the problem lies with federal law. And I do not know if there are current challenges to that specific issue. I can certainly research it, but regardless of what we do today, what our regulation says, that mandate by the federal government exists on us, and Mr. Pereira, will have to grant these applications irregardless unless we challenge the federal law, which is a very, very burdensome task, which I would obviously have to do some research about to see whether or not that would be supportable by law and by what has occurred across the country.
Okay, thank you. Couple more. Are we violating our mission statement, which is open government, health, safety, welfare, and environment of our citizens? Are we going against our mission statement by passing this amendment?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I think that's basically to interpretation. On one angle, I would, let me just do something here. If I switched hats and I became a citizen rather than a presenter or somebody who is in charge with enforcing the regulations, I would say that there may be a possibility that we are in violation of our code of ethics, or not so much necessarily the code of ethics, but the language that is in our land use code that speaks about general health, safety, welfare. However, I indicated to you in my presentation, and I stated this at the closing, that there is nothing that a county can do that I'm aware of to federal law regarding potential health risks. So I don't know that we as a county can impose restrictions based on a lot of the testimony that was given regarding health risks. So that's my opinion, my interpretation. Whether it's an accurate one or not, I don't know. But that's what I have to offer.
Okay. That kind of just rolls, it's my turn. You've been doing that the whole meeting. It's very disrespectful. So, I guess, do these changes actually cause the rollout, I'm trying to use words, rollout of 5G, open the door for 5G, backdoor us into 5G? Because if it does, there's obviously way too many questions about it. It's difficult for me to decide. Does it create the rollout, open the door, and make a backdoor for 5G to come in? Or does it not?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Fambro, I'll yield to Mr. Ogden.
Commissioner Fambro and Commissioners, as I stated a minute ago, the door has been not just opened, but the door was created and implemented by the federal government. 5G through legislation and through FCC regulations is the push for 5G. The industry obviously pushing for it. Laws have been passed to say, yep, this is happening. And yes, there have been rulings that we as a county cannot impose restrictions upon the current 4G or any lower iteration of telecommunications equipment based upon our health concerns. Now, that is absolute, health concerns are always a legitimate issue, but they need to be taken up with Congress and the states unless the courts overturn it, which they have
Just
not.
as a point of fact, the California State Supreme Court decided with the city of San Francisco.
So we are just having this conversation with our department head and commission.
You know, it's just troubling, Randy. We had a meeting recently where we were told to go against the constitutional amendment. Now we're saying we have to follow it. So, I don't know. I guess.
Any other questions, Commissioner Campbell?
None that makes sense now. Thank you for your time.
Commissioner Blankenhorn, then we'll go Commissioner Romero, and Vice Chair as well. Closing comments from Mr. Vigil.
May I ask Mr. Vigil one more question?
We've got a commission, we've had all evening, all day, so we might be here for another while. Let's see what happens here.
Okay. So, what this amendment does is it allows the planning department to not require a permit for a carrier or a tower owner, depending on the entity, to upgrade their equipment. Upgrade their existing equipment on existing towers. That's it. The planning department has brought it to us because they don't want to be burdened by the 20% rule and trying to figure out whether or not a new antenna is going to kick that in. And it also, of course, conflicts with some of the other provisions, but the overriding reason that the planning department brings this to us is because the FCC, as authorized by federal law, has said that in the interest of better cell phone coverage, we are going to tell local governments that for these limited situations where they're just upgrading equipment on existing towers, you can't require them to go through a lengthy permitting process. That's what federal law is telling us. Our planning department is asking us to pass these amendments so that they can be in compliance with the federal law. These amendments would not enable full deployment of 5G. 5G requires more antennas than can be placed on existing towers. There's nowhere near enough existing towers within Taos County to allow for deployment of 5G. That may or may not come down the line. If and when Verizon or whomever finishes with all of their cities and 5G work and gets to Taos County and says, we want to place these antennas, I think they're like that size, we want to place these antennas all over your county, they do have to come to us. They do have to come to us and ask. It remains to be seen how much discretion we will have at that point. There's going to be lawsuits, like everybody has pointed out, that there are existing lawsuits and lawsuits are coming that will probably decide that issue before we have to decide it ourselves. it's hard to ignore people, you know, who are suffering from health problems. You can't do it. But, you know, we all have our cell phones, or most of us do, and we all have our routers, and it is part of our lives. Some of us are suffering ill effects from that, possibly. It's not, you know, there's not like 100% or even close to 100% agreement on this health issue, and it is above our pay grade to parse it out. Let me just say, organizations that say wireless devices pose no known health risks are the World Health Organization, American Cancer Society, Institute of Electrical Engineers, National Institute of Health, Federal Communications Commission, and the Food and Drug Administration. It's not like nobody has looked at this. It's not like it's absolutely 100% agreed. Anyhow, regardless, I'm not a scientist. I know there's people on both sides of it. I absolutely concur with Edward on this. It's above his pay grade and mine. In the meantime, there's a few applications that they want to consider under FCC law that would improve cell phone coverage within our community. There are benefits to faster, better cell phone coverage. There's educational benefits, there's safety benefits, there's health benefits in terms of what hospitals can do. It's not clear.
Be respectful.
It's not clear that all of the community's best interests are served by Taos County staying right where we are with our cell phone coverage. That's not clear to me, I'm sorry. So that's it. That's it. Thank you for listening, and thank you all for showing up, and thank you for
we all have had an opportunity to have your conversation. This is not for anybody to have any kind of rebuttal. I'm going to go ahead and move forward with Commissioner Romero, finish off with Vice Chair, and then I will be calling for vote.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I really appreciate the voices, the concerns, the opinions that were shared today. Of all of them, the young lady sitting at the window, her thoughts, her advice probably touched me the most. And so I thank you very much. And with that, Edward, hearing what you did today, is there anything that you would do to recommend to this commission that maybe do not vote on this today until the language on these amendments is strengthened?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Commissioner Romero, I heard an awful lot of testimony, and I heard an awful lot of good testimony. And so to the extent, I don't per se have a dog in the fight myself. All I'm doing is coming before you and pointing out what I believe is a flaw in our regulations right now that contradicts itself. If it is appropriate for us to step back and redo or rework this amendment to include small wireless facilities, or to clarify the language that is possibly better understood, I'd be supportive for that. I don't have an issue with that. Like I said, I don't have a dog in the fight. All I'm doing again is coming before you and saying this problem exists. The only downfall that I see to them is when I do have an application that comes in now under the existing regulations, how do I treat it? How do I handle it? Under what permit do I guide it down, or under what path? When one section says a commercial zoning clearance permit, and another section says a special use permit, but yet another section says it's excluded. No type of permit is required. So in a nutshell, if we act and do nothing today, I'm still direction, or I'd turn to legal, and we would make a determination with the requirement. So, in a sense, if we still continue operating with what we have today, by federal law, I may be forced to waive a permit requirement. So that's the question that I have to you really, is which direction do you want to go in? And that's obviously the vote that you'll be taking. But is this the perfect solution? Absolutely not. It's not the perfect solution. We've heard a lot about the deployment of small wire facilities and wireways and antennas and power poles. This amendment doesn't cover that. Is it something that we should be addressing? Absolutely, it's probably something that we should be addressing, but unfortunately, we didn't structure the amendment to include that language at this point. Where do we get there, or how do we get there? It will probably be a subsequent amendment.
How long would it take to do that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I don't have a complete answer for you as to how long that would take. Obviously, we would work with legal, and we would try and structure the best type of language that is in accordance with the requirements, with the FCC requirements. And so when it's all said and done, I came to you in March to request this public hearing, March 19th to be specific. I came in front of you, so here we are, April, May, June, nearly 3 months later at a public hearing. So at minimum, it would appear that it would take 3 months, but then again, take into consideration, we still have to craft the language. We still have to come up with some language that we believe meets or suits the needs of some of the discussions that we're have today. And then we need to vet that with our legal department. We would need to vet that with our county manager, and then once we have something that we believe is appropriate to bring to you, that's at the time that I would come in front of you and request a date and time for our public hearings. So it could toll anywhere from 3 to 6 months is my belief.
So do you see anything else coming before you that would threaten the ability for us to follow through with what we're talking about?
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Blankenhorn, Commissioner Romero, I have not been approached by another individual other than the T-Mobile individual that I'm working with now. Obviously, I can't crystal ball the future. I have no idea whether I'll have a subsequent request or a subsequent inquiry. So, having said that, no, I have no idea.
Anything else, Commissioner Romero? Not yet.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and Mr. Beal. So I have been intently reading the FCC's declaratory ruling in September of 2018, the document I sent you, which primarily outlines rules and regulations we can follow for 5G, but also includes what is allowed for small wireless facilities, which is what we are talking about today. And in number 144, it says, as noted above, multiple authorizations may be required before a deployment is allowed. For instance, a locality may require a zoning permit, a building permit, an electrical permit, a road closure permit, architectural engineering permit for an applicant to place, construct, or modify its proposed personal wireless service facilities. And that is what we're talking about, is personal wireless facilities. So with that being said, I don't believe we're ready to act on this because we have no permit requirements. I don't know if we construction permit, building permit, because we are allowed to have rules relating to modification of existing small wireless facilities. So I don't see how we can even move forward because we don't have a complete document. Now, it's my understanding you can exercise your authority under the existing application and permitted under the commercial zoning permit. The issue with the special use permit is if there's a 60-day clock ticking, there's not enough time to have these public hearings. And we know we can't forbid these facilities. We're not allowed to. But we still can vet them. We can still placement. So I guess my first question is, what permit would this fall under? Do we have a permit?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, before I address your question, I respectfully disagree with the comments that you just made. I want to explain to you why. The declaratory ruling that you provided to me is my interpretation and my belief that it is specific to small wireless facilities, and it's not specific to a cell tower. I by no means am a cell tower expert, and I'm not trying to portray that I'm a small tower expert, but I want to share with you what my belief is upon research. An existing cell tower facility is and should be considered a macro cell. It should be considered a small cell. And a macro cell is basically a traditional macro cell towers have a coverage area that spans several miles. They're hard to miss, although their signal degrades towards the edge of the coverage areas. That's what we have in regards to existing cell towers. Whereas a small cell, which I believe that you made reference to in the declaratory ruling and third report order, which is specific to small wireless facilities, is small cell technology is much more discreet, mounted on existing structures like rooftops and utility poles. Sometimes they're accompanied by refrigerator-sized equipment. Because the small cells only supply a few hundred feet of coverage, they are best suited for dense areas like downtown. So I think, again, I'm not an expert, but I think there's a clear distinction here that there is a macro cell versus a small cell, and the request today has nothing to do with a small cell. It has nothing to do with the placement or the deployment of small wireless communications systems or small wireless facilities. And so to answer your question, to attempt to answer your question, under the present code right now, obviously the argument is, are you less than a 25% expansion, commercial zoning clearance permit, more than 25% expansion, special use permit, another portion says no type of permit is required. But if this amendment is approved, then it basically would not require any type of permitting from the planning department, but that's not to say that it would not require review. We would still do a review on the type of the existing eligible facility. Is it that? And then we establish a small checklist that we can certainly expand. But I hope that answers your question, and that's my personal belief.
Anything else, Vice Chair?
So, this application, would you require a construction permit?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner O'Donnell, the rule of thumb that we understand and that we have been applying in the planning department is if the State of New Mexico Construction Industries Division Electrical Bureau requires an electrical permit, they would need a building permit from our department. That's the determination of how we've been applying individuals who come in to place antennas in existing cell towers. If CID Electrical Bureau determines that no electrical permit is needed, which they have done in some instances, then a building permit from our department is not required.
Well, again, you see there's such a disparity in interpretations, and I do not want to give up any of our authority. And if this language you have today before us does and excludes us cost-based fees, which now you say we're not charging, we can charge for these rulings, I think we need to remand it back and add additional language for clarification.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Commissioner O'Donnell, if it is the belief of the Commission that what we are proposing today is not right, is not the correct language that you would like to see, certainly you have it within your ability to remand back to the planning department. And as we indicated to you, we would be more than happy and willing to work with our legal department to address more of the concerns or questions that you may have.
Yes, Commissioner.
I feel that we need to do that. I wouldn't be able to support today's.
Is that enough? Are you voting right now?
No.
Okay, well, I think you gotta hold your opinion and hold your opportunity.
I'm just saying what I feel.
If we start making a motion in a second, we have for discussion, you can do that. It seems to me that right now, there is some folks already pretty much prematurely voting no. And I think if you want to express your concern and your comments, use that when it's called for question.
You're just jumping into conclusions.
Well, pretty quickly, I would also.
I did want to say that
Vice Chair.
nothing in this chapter, this is footnote 47 USC 332 7A, nothing in this chapter shall limit or affect the authority of a state or local government over decisions regarding the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless services and common carrier wireless exchange. Now they define that, the statute defines personal wireless services to include CMRS, unlicensed wireless services, and common carrier wireless exchange access services. So I do think what we're talking about today qualifies under the small wireless service facilities, and that we have authority to review the applications, issue permits, issue construction permits, make sure they have electrical permits if necessary. And so I would not be able to support this right now because I think it needs more language to clarify. Because you're telling me they don't need a permit, you have to review all these applications and not be charged, where we have the authority to charge to review these applications. I have issues.
Thank you. Point taken.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, call for vote at this time.
Was there a motion?
Can Mr. Audio, I mean, she threw out a legal opinion there. I want to hear the legal attorney's opinion of the comments that Commissioner O'Donnell, Vice Chair O'Donnell just correct.
Commissioners, the statements in regard to small cell technology came into being with 5G, and it is an attempt to regulate the new 5G network with small cells. It's a term of art for new cells that don't currently exist in the community. The regulations that Mr. Correa has introduced here, regulating modification of existing cell towers, are not small cells.
It just says technology.
And therefore, the regulations which the Vice Chair was citing there do not preempt the requirements of federal law in this specific section. This is a specific section for existing modification of existing towers.
This is only regarding the existing cell phone towers. Not all the new technology, not all the small cell, not all the other stuff that's coming. This is only to help you with the existing cell towers, correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Blankenhorn,
Mr. Chairman,
we will call for a motion.
the notion that we should reject this because it's not perfect, because it doesn't include this or it doesn't include that, that's not addressing any of the issues of these people. That's completely sidestepping it. What the people here today are protesting is not whether or not we've touched every base or dotted every I. They don't want 5G to come into our community. That's not what they're talking about.
This is existing cell towers, this isn't that.
Right, and so, yes, maybe it's not perfect, but it frees up the planning department to deal with applications as they come through in a legal and efficient manner that just increases the coverage that we already have. That's all we're doing here today. This notion, oh, we don't have this, we don't have that, it's just delay tactics. And it's not addressing these people's concerns. So, and we have a living, breathing LUR, as Edward pointed out earlier today, to where when we see imperfections, if you want to attach some sort of a fee for that minor review that Edward does, then fine, I'll support that, but that comes down the road. We've been here all day addressing this, and I don't want it to go to waste. I make a motion to approve the amendments. Thank you.
Motion has been made by Commissioner Blankenhorn. Do I hear a second?
I have a second, because this has to do with the existing stuff, and that was said in the first paragraph of the presentation and nowhere listed.
So why? So a motion and a second have been made. Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Martinez, please call the
Commissioner Romero?
No.
Commissioner Blankenhorn?
Yes.
Commissioner Penrose?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
No.
Chairman Gagos?
yes.
There's a shot.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. We hope to hear soon, and we will have an opportunity to talk about many issues. So I want to make this clear. This ordinance for us has given us an opportunity where there was no opportunity prior to you guys coming. The gate was, as Mr. Aguirre said, it's already been open. What Mr. Behill did was he tried to clean it up so we have some opportunity to be able to review. Now, what's going to need to be done is we're going to have to go back and look at this and add to this ordinance with future amendments that'll indicate all the concerns you guys want. But if we were to pass this today, there would be nothing there for nothing to be done. So maybe it's one small step, but it's bigger than going backwards. And going backwards is sitting here doing nothing about it at all. So I appreciate you guys all coming. We do have another item on our agenda, so we'll move forward with item 6 as a budgetary matter. Mr. Behill, thank you, and your staff. Item A is approval of budget adjustment to the general fund fiscal year ending closure with Ms. Silvia Martinez, our finance director, here. Ms. Martinez is not here yet. Mr. Martinez will come down. Yes, sir. As per friendly amendment to the agenda, move from item 6 to item 7. So motion's been made. Second by Commissioner Blankenhorn. Mr. Mr. call roll.
Yep.
Yes. Item 7 is a resolution and ordinance. Item A is discussion and consideration decision regarding the approval of resolution 2019-28, authorizing and directing publication of the title, general summary, time, date, and meeting place for proposed ordinance 2019-5, adopting a 0.25% Taos County water and sanitation district gross receipt tax within the El Prado Water and Sanitation District.
Commissioners, I will make this brief. This is a renewal of a tax that was in place in 2013, same tax rate. We have a duty, you as a commission has a duty to pass this tax once we receive a proclamation from them asking this to be put on the agenda. If the voters vote for it, the ordinance goes into effect. So this is just publication of that ordinance. The clerk has received the proclamation from El Prado Water and Sanitation District calling for the election on August 27th. So I request your support on publishing this ordinance.
Commissioners, move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second been made. Ms. Martinez, please call roll.
Commissioner Romero?
Yes.
Commissioner Blakenher?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco?
Yes.
Vice Chair O'Donnell? Chairman Gay?
Yes. Next item is item B, discuss the consideration and decision regarding the approval of resolution 2019-29, accepting the special election proclamation of the Taos Water and Sanitation District, calling for the conduct of an election, asking voters to approve or deny 1/4 of 1% gross receipt tax on the privilege of doing business in the boundaries of the Taos Water and Sanitation District. Proceeds to go to the district for the district's purposes. Ms. Martinez and Mr. Idaho. Motion and second have been made.
I want to say something
With
for
comment.
the record. There was a conflict here. This El Prado Water Sanitation District was facing a conflict between the Local Election Act, new language on how to do this, and the old language of the specific gross receipts tax statute. We've solved that by doing this resolution along with their election proclamation as best we can. There is a defect in the current status of the law. So I just wanted to make that clear. This is our best effort at fixing that.
For discussion, Commissioner.
Since I fought that that change in that election law, is this just what you're dealing with? It's making
It
everything
is, yes.
way more difficult?
Yes, so
And ultimately more expensive to us, correct?
well, all the cost is gonna be incurred by the district, not by ourselves, so.
But it's making it very difficult to understand, correct?
It makes it a lot more, time consuming and, yeah. But we'll do it.
And,
Thank you. So there's a motion and a second that have been made. If there's any other discussion, I'd ask for a roll call. Mr. Martinez.
Commissioner Romero?
Yes.
Commissioner Blakenher?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco?
Yes.
Vice Chair O'Donnell?
Yes.
Chairman Gay?
Yes.
Thank you all.
We'll go ahead and move back up to the budget matters. We'll be having our manager present us.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the commission. Before you, we have the final budget adjustment. We'd like to adjust the budget to close it out for the year. We're asking for a budget adjustment of $11,126 for full-time positions, overtime, and health insurance and utilities that both accounted for us. So those will just get us flush to close out on the expense line item.
Move to approve. Motion's been made. Second, Mr. Martinez, please call roll.
Commissioner Romero?
Yes.
Commissioner Blakenher?
Yep.
Commissioner Blanco? Commissioner Blanco? Vice Chair O'Donnell?
Yes.
Chairman Gay?
Yes. Thank you all, commissioners. The next item is adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Motion's been made. It is 2:44. Thank you all for participating today.
I can show you the
We will see you soon.
We have authority over that, so.
Commissioner?
Yes.
Will you sign this?
Here.
You didn't hear about that?
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Yeah.
Next time.